The ferry's engine thrummed a low, persistent lament beneath Dean's feet, a vibration that resonated with the hollow ache in his own chest. He stood at the bow, the salt spray a cold kiss on his face, tasting of rust and distant, forgotten things. For weeks, the world had felt like a blurred watercolor, his grief a shroud. Now the sharp tang of the sea was a welcome shock, a reminder that sensation still existed beyond the dull throb of loss. He watched the mainland shrink, its familiar contours dissolving into the gray haze, a deliberate severing of ties. This island, an indistinct smudge on the horizon, represented a desolate canvas, a place where he hoped the stark emptiness outside might finally mirror the one within, and perhaps, eventually, begin to heal it. The fog, a living entity, thickened as they churned further from shore, swallowing the sky, muting the already subdued light. It coiled around the small vessel, clinging like damp wool, obscuring everything but the immediate churn of the water. He was a cartographer by trade, accustomed to precise lines and clear boundaries. But here, the world was dissolving into an amorphous, unsettling uncertainty. He found a strange comfort in it, a sense of being truly untethered. "Last stop, friend," a gruff voice rumbled, pulling Dean from his thoughts. The ferryman, a man with a beard like tangled seaweed and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless voyages, gestured towards a ramshackle wooden pier jutting out from a barely visible shoreline. Seal Rock. Not many come this way anymore. Even fewer stay. Dean nodded, a tight, practiced movement. He grabbed his worn canvas duffel and a sturdy wooden crate containing his grandfather's few remaining personal effects, salvaged from storage. The ferry bumped against the barnacle-encrusted pilings with a jarring thud. As he stepped onto the creaking planks, the ferryman gave him a long, appraising look. "Your granddad was a peculiar sort. Kept to himself. Said the island had a way of listening." The man paused, his gaze drifting towards the impenetrable wall of fog that ringed the island. "Best not to listen back too hard." With that cryptic warning, the ferryman secured the gangplank, and the ferry's engine roared to life, turning its bow back into the opaque expanse, leaving Dean utterly alone on the desolate pier. Dean pulled his wool jacket tighter. The path from the pier was little more than a muddy track, winding its way up a low rise covered in skeletal, wind-battered gorse bushes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen vegetation. He trudged inland, the weight of his belongings a familiar burden. The cottage, his grandfather's legacy, materialized through the mist like a faded photograph. It was a squat, stone structure, clinging precariously to the cliff face, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the turbulent sea. The paint on the cottage's exterior was peeling, the roof shingles loose and moss-covered, and a rusted weather vane pointed perpetually west, as if frozen in a forgotten gale. This was not a place of comfort, but of endurance. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and something else. A faint, lingering aroma of pipe tobacco and old paper. Dean's boots scuffed on the grit-covered floorboards as he moved through the small, cramped rooms. Everything was exactly as his grandfather had left it, preserved in a sepia-toned tableau of abandonment. A heavy oak table dominated the kitchen, scarred with generations of use. He found the bedroom, a narrow space dominated by a single iron-frame bed. On a small, rickety desk in the corner, amidst a scattered collection of nautical charts and drafting tools, lay a leather-bound journal. Dean's fingers traced the worn cover. His grandfather's elegant, if somewhat spidery script filled the pages, chronicling weather patterns, tide charts, and observations of the sea. But as he turned a page, a single strange entry caught his eye, dated years ago, scrawled in a heavier hand than the surrounding text, almost urgent. The sound, it's not the wind, it's deeper, from the deep, and the lights, they flicker at the weather station. Not electrical, something else. Something watching. Dean frowned, rereading the words. The weather station. He knew of it from the island's sparse map. A small, automated outpost on the northernmost tip collecting atmospheric data. He remembered his grandfather's quiet, intense nature, his obsession with the sea. But something watching? It felt out of place, a ripple of unease in the otherwise stoic record. He closed the journal, placing it back on the desk. He was tired, bone-weary from the journey and the lingering grief. He unpacked a few essentials, the mundane acts a small anchor in the swirling current of his thoughts. The wind had picked up, a low howl beginning to keen around the eaves of the cottage, rattling a loose pane in the kitchen window. It was then he heard it. A faint, irregular thump, thump from somewhere beneath the floorboards, almost like a heavy, slow heartbeat. He froze, straining his ears, but the sound vanished, swallowed by the rising wind. He told himself it was the old house settling, the sea air working its way into the ancient timbers. But the image of his grandfather's agitated handwriting, the cryptic mention of the weather station and the listening island, lingered in his mind. He was here, alone, on an island that seemed to hold its breath, and the silence was beginning to feel less empty and more like a presence. The slip of paper still clutched in Dean's hand felt brittle, almost alive. The weather station. Something watching. He read the cramped script again, the ink smudged in places as if his grandfather's hand had trembled. It felt unfinished. A fragment of a thought ripped from a larger, darker context. He'd always known his grandfather was a solitary man, prone to long silences and an almost reverent obsession with the churning gray expanse of the sea. But something watching? It nudged at a deeply buried unease Dean had been trying to ignore since his arrival. This island, with its relentless fog and the constant hungry sigh of the ocean, was already a place that felt perpetually on the cusp of revealing a secret. He crumpled the note slightly, then smoothed it out, tucking it into the pocket of his trousers. Rationality was a sturdy shield, and Dean clung to it. His grandfather had been old, perhaps prone to flights of fancy in his later years, exacerbated by the isolation. The weather station was just an automated outpost, a collection of sensors, nothing more. He told himself this with a conviction that felt thin, like stretched canvas. The next morning, a peculiar stillness hung over the cottage. The usual roar and crash of the waves against the cliff face was muted, replaced by a soft, sucking sound. The tide was out, further than he had ever seen it. A strange, metallic tang, like old copper and decay, hung heavy on the air, mingling with the usual briny scent of the sea. He walked down to the water's edge, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, yielding sand. The sea receded further with each observation, pulling back as if reluctant to touch the shore. He watched a wave, normally a formidable curl of white foam, merely sigh against the sand, barely reaching his feet before drawing back, revealing more of the seabed. It was an unnatural rhythm, a slow, deliberate retreat that defied the island's usual powerful currents. The water itself looked different too. A deeper, almost oily indigo in the distance. Closer to the shore it was murky, like stirred silt. What could cause such a drastic shift? A distant storm? A seismic event? Seismic. He tried to recall the patterns of the moon, the phases of the tide, but nothing fit this strange, persistent ebb. At first, Dean dismissed them as the wind, a trick of the gull's cries, or the creak of the old cottage timbers. But they persisted. A low, sibilant murmur, like sand being dragged across stone, or perhaps countless tongues speaking beneath the waves. It wasn't a distinct language, not words he could parse, but a pervasive, unsettling hum that seemed to rise and fall with the strange, drawn-out exhalations of the sea. He found himself pausing, cocking his head, straining to hear, then shaking it off with a sigh. His grief, his isolation, they were playing tricks on him. That was it. He was a cartographer, a man of precise measurements and observable phenomena, not spectral voices. He spent the afternoon attempting to organize his grandfather's study, a room filled with maps, navigational charts, and books on marine biology. Dust motes danced in the shafts of weak light that penetrated the grimy window panes. He pulled it out. It was a journal, its leather cover swollen and warped by years of exposure to salt air and perhaps something more. The pages within were stiff, some fused together, others brittle and flaking. Many were stained with what looked like seawater, blurring the script and distorting the drawings. Dean carefully pried open the first few pages. The early entries were mundane enough. Weather observations, notes on local flora and fauna, the occasional complaint about a faulty lamp. But then, a shift. The tone grew frantic, the script more jagged. There were sketches, crude but disturbingly vivid. One drawing, particularly unsettling, depicted a series of swirling patterns, almost like a vortex, with distorted, almost human-like figures being pulled into its maw. Beneath it, in bold, stark letters, was scrawled, "The Deep Song." Dean's breath hitched. He flipped through more pages. Not with voice, but with pull. It takes the mind, then the body. The weather station. It hears it first. It draws it close. His grandfather had been obsessed, yes, but this was beyond eccentricity. This was a man terrified, meticulously documenting a growing horror. But the words, the deep song, echoed in his head, a discordant melody. And then there was the weather station, the note, the journal. Both pointed to it. Dean looked out the window, past the fog-shrouded rocks, towards the northern tip of the island, where the automated outpost stood sentinel, silently collecting its data. What exactly was it collecting, out there in the relentless solitude? And what, precisely, was it hearing? He had to go there. The cold, hard knot in Dean's stomach had tightened overnight, twisting with every restless turn he made in the narrow bed. His grandfather's frantic scrawl, the chilling certainty of the journal, had burrowed deep into his waking thoughts, then festered in the dark. He couldn't dismiss it as the ramblings of a lonely old man anymore. He needed answers. He needed to understand what his grandfather had been so desperately trying to warn him about. The first rays of dawn, muted by the perpetual shroud of fog, did little to dispel the gloom inside the cottage. There was the old fisherman, whose eyes held a distant, weary knowledge, and the general store owner, who'd offered a terse, almost warning about the island's isolation, but neither seemed likely sources for the kind of information he sought. His gaze fell upon the charts and maps he'd brought with him, his own tools of a trade that now felt utterly insignificant. He needed a different kind of map, one that charted the island's forgotten past. Dean remembered a small, sturdy building he'd passed on his initial drive from the dock, perched on a higher point of the island, its antennae reaching into the low-hanging cloud. It was the island's weather station, a place he'd vaguely registered as a functional necessity. Perhaps, he thought, it served as more than just a meteorological outpost. Remote communities often consolidated resources. The walk to the weather station was longer than he remembered, the path overgrown and slick with dew. The fog, thick and damp, clung to him, muffling the already sparse sounds of the island. The air carried the familiar tang of salt and decay, but today, beneath it, he thought he detected something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sweetness, like decaying flowers, unsettling in its incongruity. The weather station itself was a squat, concrete structure, surprisingly well-maintained given its isolation. An older woman, the station attendant, sat at a desk, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face etched with the lines of wind and sun. She looked up, her gaze sharp, unwavering. "Morning," she said, her voice raspy, like dry leaves. "You're the new keeper, aren't you?" "Dean." He nodded. "That's me. I was wondering if you might have any old records here. Local history, perhaps?" He gestured vaguely. "My grandfather, he was quite the collector of island lore." The attendant's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Lore, you say?" She rose slowly, her movements deliberate, led him to a dusty corner of the room, where a few shelves held a motley collection of binders and yellowed papers. "Most of what we keep is meteorological. But old man Elias, he was before your grandfather. He had a fondness for the old stories. Said it helped him understand the weather better. The island has a memory, he'd always say." Dean's fingers brushed over the brittle spines of the binders. He pulled one marked, "Local Anecdotes and Sea Tales." The pages inside were loose, typewritten notes interspersed with handwritten observations. He began to read, his eyes scanning for anything that resonated with his grandfather's journal. He found it. Not explicitly, not immediately, but in fragments. Repeated mentions of the Deep Ones, the sleeping city beneath the waves, and the Ancient Compact. One entry, dated nearly a century ago, spoke of a time when the tides grew hungry. A pact. It was all there, thinly veiled in superstitious language, but unmistakable. He walked back to the cottage, the journal in his satchel suddenly feeling like a live thing, pulsing with the terrible truth he was now uncovering. His grandfather hadn't been mad. He'd been a witness to a pact, a bargain struck with something ancient, something that demanded tribute. That night, the dreams came, more vivid, more terrifying than any he'd experienced before. He was submerged, not drowning, but breathing the frigid, crushing water. The cottage was utterly silent, save for the rhythmic moan of the foghorn in the distance. Then he saw it. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from the corner of the small, cramped bathroom. He stumbled out of bed, his legs unsteady, and pushed open the door. Along the base of the porcelain sink, where the caulk met the ceramic, a delicate, almost beautiful patch of bioluminescent algae pulsed with a soft green light. It was alive, growing there, a creeping, unbidden life where no plant should be. And it wasn't just the sink. A smaller patch clung to the rough stone of the windowsill in the kitchen, a tiny, glowing testament to something unnatural, something that had begun to breach the boundaries of his reality. The air in the cottage suddenly felt thick, heavy, as if the water from his dream had seeped into the very foundations of his home. The pact was real, and whatever had made it was no longer content to sleep beneath the waves. It was reaching, and it had found him. He woke with a gasp, his body slick with sweat, the phantom chill of the deep water clinging to his skin. He sat up, trying to shake off the oppressive weight of the dream, to convince himself it was merely a nocturnal echo of his anxieties. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the rough wool blanket tangling around his ankles. He moved through the cottage, attempting to impose order on his own frayed nerves. He made tea, the clinking of the ceramic mug against the saucer sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. He set it down, turned to fetch a biscuit, and when he turned back, the mug had shifted just perceptibly, a centimeter or two closer to the edge of the table. He stared at it, then at his hands. Had he nudged it? His memory offered no clear answer. He dismissed it as absent-mindedness, a trick of the light, a lingering fatigue. But then, a low, resonant hum began. It was subtle at first, a vibration more felt than heard, originating from deep within the fabric of the cottage itself. It wasn't the foghorn, nor the wind rattling the panes. This was internal, a thrumming that seemed to bypass his ears and settle directly in his chest, a deep, hypnotic resonance that made the air feel thick and heavy. He pressed a hand against the rough stone wall, then the wooden floorboards. The hum intensified slightly beneath his palm, a living pulse. It wasn't mechanical. It felt organic, ancient. It made the small hairs on his arms prickle. He felt a peculiar disorientation, a subtle blurring at the edges of his vision. He moved to the small, tarnished mirror in the hallway, hoping to splash cold water on his face to clear the lingering fog from his mind. As he approached, his reflection wavered. The image rippled, as if viewed through turbulent water, then snapped back to normal, his own pale, anxious face staring back. He blinked, hard, then stared closer. Nothing. Just his reflection, looking weary and unnerved. He pressed his palms against his temples. Was he truly losing his grip? The island, the isolation, his grief. It was all coalescing into a grotesque hallucination. The hum persisted, a deep, pervasive drone. It seemed to whisper to something dormant within him, a primal fear. He couldn't shake the image of his distorted face, or the feeling that the cottage was no longer merely a dwelling, but a conduit for something else. He remembered his grandfather's reclusiveness, the strange, almost ritualistic order of his belongings, the way he would sometimes stare out at the churning sea with an expression Dean had never understood. He needed answers. Driven by a desperate need to rationalize, to find a logical explanation, Dean began to search the cottage with a new intensity. He ran his hands along the rough-hewn beams, peered into dusty corners, examined the worn floorboards. He pried it up with a rusty letter opener. Inside the shallow cavity, nestled in a layer of dried seaweed and sand, lay a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded in places, but the script was unmistakably his grandfather's. Dean's fingers trembled as he opened it. Crude symbols, vaguely reminiscent of ancient runes, were scrawled in the margins. He saw sketches of a peculiar, multi-tentacled creature, its form amorphous, writhing, unlike anything he'd ever seen in any marine biology text. One passage, written in a frantic hand, detailed offerings to the deep, mentioning a pact and the rising tide. Another spoke of the great hunger and the necessity of appeasement. His grandfather hadn't been simply eccentric. He had been engaged in something horrifying. A desperate personal war against an unseen force. His grandfather hadn't been warding off something. He'd been trying to contain it, perhaps even feeding it. As Dean read, the hypnotic hum intensified, growing louder, more insistent. The light from the window seemed to dim, swallowed by an encroaching gloom. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the room, not a normal shadow cast by the furniture, but something viscous and shimmering, like dark water given malevolent form. It moved with an unsettling fluidity, gathering itself, elongating. Dean froze, the journal clutched in his hand, his breath catching in his throat. Dean recoiled with a choked cry, knocking over the heavy wooden chair behind him. He scrambled backwards, pressing himself against the bookshelf, his heart hammering against his ribs. The aqueous form surged forward, its leading edge seeming to stretch, to reach for him. He saw no eyes, no mouth, but he felt an undeniable predatory intent. He threw the journal, a desperate, futile gesture. It passed through the object, unheeding, before Dean could even register the lack of impact. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. His grandfather's journal, his desperate entries, the crude drawings. They weren't the ramblings of a madman. They were a testament to a terrifying reality. He needed more information, something to make sense of this escalating nightmare. His grandfather had spent so much time at the old weather station up on the bluff, a place he'd rarely let Dean visit. He sat up, trying to shake off the oppressive weight of the dream, to convince himself it was merely a memory. The salt-crusted air felt heavy, pressing in on him, and the familiar creaks of the old structure seemed less like settling wood and more like a slow, deliberate breathing. He recognized it now, or thought he did, as the deep song his grandfather had mentioned. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, a pressure behind his eyes, a growing disquiet that tightened his chest. Dean swung his legs out of bed, the rough wool blanket tangling around his ankles. He found the journal exactly where he'd left it, on the small writing desk by the window, pages splayed open. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the faded ink. This time, he wasn't skimming for vague warnings. He was searching for answers, a desperate need clawing at him. He turned past the early mundane entries, past the observations of weather patterns and shipping traffic, past the first hints of the deep song. The tide turns, the hunger grows, it demands its due. Preparations made, the binding must hold, the circle unbroken. The offering accepted, the lullaby sung, slumber, beast, slumber. Dean's breath hitched. Offering? Lullaby? Binding? This wasn't the passive observation of a lighthouse keeper. This was active involvement. His grandfather hadn't just been watching the entity. He had been working to keep it dormant, engaging in some grim, arcane ritual. His grandfather wasn't a victim. He was a guardian, a custodian of some terrible pact. The deep song intensified, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to seep into his bones. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog, but the sensation persisted. Was he truly seeing it, or was his mind already beginning to unravel? He needed air, a different perspective. He grabbed his oilskin coat and headed out, the biting wind a welcome slap against his face. The fog had rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the horizon, muffling the world. He decided to walk to the old weather station, a small, squat building nestled on the highest point of the island, a place his grandfather had often frequented. Maybe there, amidst the old instruments and faded charts, he would find another piece of the puzzle. The path was treacherous, slick with sea spray and hidden stones. Each step was a gamble against the unseen terrain. The deep song followed him. Or perhaps it was simply everywhere on this island, emanating from the very bedrock. It seemed to pulse in time with the ocean's ceaseless roar, a primal rhythm that spoke of vast, unknowable depths. When he reached the weather station, the wind whipped around the corrugated iron roof with a mournful shriek. The door was ajar, groaning on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was stagnant, thick with the smell of damp earth and old paper. Barometers, anemometers, and thermographs, long defunct, stood like silent sentinels. On a workbench, beneath a layer of fine gray dust, Dean found a small, leather-bound ledger, distinct from his grandfather's personal journal. It was a logbook for the weather station, dating back decades. Pressure dropping. The pull intensifies. At the bottom, a single jagged symbol. It was the same symbol Dean had seen etched into the stone tablet in his dream. The anchor point. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical location. The lamplight seemed to flicker, not from any draft, but from the sheer force of the sound. He walked straight to the center of the lighthouse, where the thick stone walls converged. He remembered the drawing, the circles radiating from the base. Nothing. Until he came to a section near the central support pillar. He pressed against it, then again, harder. A faint grinding sound answered him. He knelt, tracing the lines, pushing with renewed urgency. Then, a faint click. He pushed again, this time with his shoulder, grunting with effort. Slowly, with a groan that echoed the deep moans of the deep song, the stone slab pivoted inward, revealing a gaping black maw beneath. A wave of frigid, damp air rushed up, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of primordial brine and something else, something metallic and ancient. The deep song surged, a deafening crescendo, as if the newly exposed passage amplified its horrific melody. Rough-hewn steps descended into the blackness, vanishing into a gloom that seemed to swallow the light whole. This was it, the hidden chamber, the crypt, and from its depths, The deep song promised an understanding far more terrible than any he could have imagined. Anchor point. The words resonated with the cacophony rising from the floorboards of the cottage. The deep song, now a guttural roar that vibrated in his teeth. Each step was a battle against the unseen forces that sought to hold his back, or perhaps to pull him faster into their grasp. He could feel it, the shift in the world around him, the edges of reality fraying like old rope. The weather station emerged from the swirling mist like a skeletal finger reaching towards a bruised sky. It was a squat, concrete structure, brutalist and functional, built to withstand the worst the Atlantic could throw at it. Rust bled from every joint, staining the gray walls a deep, angry orange. The wind howled through its empty window frames, a mournful counterpoint to the deep song that now pulsed directly in his skull, threatening to crack it open. A broken anemometer spun erratically atop a sagging pole, its metallic shriek like a choked scream. Dean pushed open the heavy, salt-corroded door. It groaned, a sound of agony, and swung inward to reveal an interior as bleak as the exterior. The air was stale, thick with the scent of damp concrete, ozone, and something else. A faint, cloying sweetness like overripe fruit, mixed with the sharp tang of old blood. Old, defunct instruments, barometers, hygrometers, wind gauges, lay scattered or mounted on the walls, silent witnesses to a forgotten vigil. His gaze swept the room, searching. The drawing in his hand seemed to hum, vibrating in sync with the internal thrumming of his own body. His fingers brushed against a cold, smooth patch of metal, oddly out of place among the rough concrete. He pressed. A section of the wall, disguised as a utility panel, swung inward with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow, lightless passage. The sweet, metallic scent intensified, making his stomach clench. Dean hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this place and the island itself. But the deep song had him, its ancient rhythm a snare pulling him forward. He stepped into the passage, fumbling for the small, sputtering lantern he'd brought. The passage sloped downwards, the walls slick with condensation. He could hear it now, not just in his head, but an actual sound echoing from below. A low, resonant thrum, like a leviathan's heartbeat. The air grew heavier, pushing against his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. The lantern's beam was swallowed by the immensity, revealing only glimpses of colossal, rough-hewn rock walls dripping with dark water. It wasn't an artifact in any sense he understood. It was a pulsating, amorphous mass, roughly spherical, but constantly shifting, contracting, and expanding with a sickening organic rhythm. It glowed with an internal luminescence, not a bright light, but a deep, bruised violet that seemed to absorb the very concept of illumination. The black liquid beneath it shimmered, reflecting the violet glow. And in its depths, Dean saw movement, vast, indistinct forms coiling and uncoiling. As he drew closer, the deep song became a deafening roar, not just of sound, but of pure, unadulterated sensation. It wasn't music. It was a hungry, ancient voice, speaking directly into the core of his being. The air around the pulsating mass warped, shimmering with an unseen energy. Dean felt a profound nausea, a dizzying sense of disorientation. The ground beneath his feet seemed to dissolve, and he was falling into the violet glow, into the black depths below. A vision, terrifying and vast, flooded his mind. He saw the island, not as solid land, but as a fragile, brittle shell. He saw the deep song entity, not as a single creature, but as an immeasurable consciousness, a vast, indifferent hunger that stretched across impossible distances, beyond the limits of light and form. It wasn't malevolent in the human sense. It was simply consuming. Not with violence, but with a slow, inexorable pull, dissolving all that was solid, all that was real, into its own formless existence. The vision receded, leaving him gasping, his knees buckling. He clutched his head, the thrumming in his skull a relentless hammer. The pulsating violet mass before him no longer seemed distant or abstract. It was immediate. It was real, and it was waiting for him. The island was already lost. He was already lost. The deep song was not just a threat. It was a promise. Anchor point. The words resonated with the cacophony rising from the floorboards of the cottage. The deep song now a guttural roar that vibrated in his teeth, rattling the very bones in his skull. It wasn't just coming from the ocean anymore. It was inside the house. A crushing weight against the walls, a slithering presence under the floorboards. He stumbled out of the cottage, the salt-laced air hitting him like a physical blow. The fog, a dense, suffocating shroud, had swallowed the world. The lighthouse beam was just a faint, diffuse halo somewhere above, struggling to pierce the oppressive gray. The ground underfoot was slick with moisture, treacherous. Every step was an act of faith, a desperate lurch forward into the unknown. The sound of the waves, usually a distant rumble, was now a deafening, frothing roar that seemed to chase him, clawing at his heels. The path to the weather station was barely a deer trail, winding precariously along the cliff edge. He could smell the ozone, sharp and metallic, mingling with the decay of kelp and the damp earth. The deep song intensified with every agonizing footfall, no longer just a sound, but a sensation. A cold, wet touch against his skin, a pressure building behind his eyes. He was losing himself. Finally, a hulking skeletal structure emerged from the mist. The weather station. It was a derelict concrete bunker, half buried in the earth, its metal antenna mast a twisted, broken finger pointing accusingly at the sky. Rust bled down its pockmarked walls like old wounds. The entrance, a heavy steel door, hung ajar, groaning on a single strained hinge. He fumbled for his lantern, its beam cutting a weak swathe through the gloom. The room was small, circular, dominated by a central plinth that once held instruments. Empty shelves lined the walls, and a single rusted chair lay overturned. Dean could feel it here, more intensely than anywhere else. It wasn't just trying to break through, it was trying to enter. His own thoughts felt foreign, a thin, reedy echo against a vast, silent roar that was not his own. He tried to articulate a name, a memory, but the words dissolved, replaced by images of crushing depths, of sightless things moving in endless black. He was losing control. His hands trembled, the journal slipping, almost falling. He was a vessel, and something ancient was trying to claim him. He slammed the journal open on the plinth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel a profound otherness brushing against his consciousness, tasting his fear, assessing his weakness. He fought it, focusing on the faded ink, the frantic lines of his grandfather's desperate legacy. Then he saw it. A series of symbols, unlike the others, drawn with a heavier hand, almost carved into the paper. Beside them, a block of text, fragmented and almost illegible, but the words shimmered with an awful clarity. Bind the gate, a final anchor, not of stone, but of living will, a severance, a giving, to hold the maw, the deepest pact, a sacrifice of self. The true lock is forged from that which holds the light, to seal the churning heart. Dean read it again, his eyes blurring, the words swirling, but their meaning solidified into a single, terrible understanding. It wasn't a life, not simply a life. It was him, his consciousness, his very being. His grandfather hadn't just been trying to seal it. He'd been trying to become the seal. And he had failed. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. It knew. It had known all along. Dean slumped against the plinth, the journal splayed open before him, revealing the terrifying truth. He was trapped. There was no escape. Only a choice. Surrender to the entity, or make the ultimate horrifying sacrifice to keep it contained. He wasn't going to let it win. Not entirely. The words from the journal still writhed behind Dean's eyes, a monstrous truth that had finally settled, cold and hard, in his gut. Him. Not an object, not a symbol, but his very consciousness, his soul, to become the living lock. The thought curdled his blood, yet a strange, terrifying calm had begun to solidify around the edges of his panic. There was no escape, only action. He pushed away from the splintered desk, the old wood groaning under his weight, and stumbled toward the cottage window. The world outside had become a canvas of the entity's burgeoning rage. The fog, usually a soft gray blanket, now clung to the glass like thick, oily tendrils, swirling with an unnatural velocity that defied the absence of wind. It wasn't just mist. It felt dense, almost viscous, pressing against the cottage walls as if trying to seep through the very mortar. Beyond the immediate shroud, the sea thrashed, not in the familiar cadence of a storm, but with a frenzied, churning violence. Waves, unnaturally high and dark, slammed against the jagged cliffs, sending plumes of spray that caught the distorted light of the overcast sky, shimmering with an unsettling, iridescent sheen. The sound was a constant guttural roar, a hungry sound that seemed to vibrate in Dean's bones, a grotesque ballet of awakening. The island itself was succumbing. He'd seen it on his way back to the cottage after the journal's final revelation. Patches of moss on the rocks pulsed faintly, a sickly bioluminescent green. Even the air had changed, heavy with the scent of stagnant salt and something else. Something metallic and ancient, like deep sea sediment disturbed after millennia. His grandfather's frantic script, usually so precise, had devolved into a desperate scrawl. Beside it, a list of items, some familiar, some arcane, each underlined with a furious triple stroke. The vessel must be prepared. The conduit must be pure. The offering must be absolute. He traced the words with a trembling finger. The counter-ritual wasn't just about sealing the gate. It was about containing the entity, drawing its attention, its essence, into a single living point of focus. A consciousness. His consciousness. A sudden sharp crack rent the air, followed by a low, mournful groan. Dean flinched, his gaze darting around the small room. The old wooden beams overhead seemed to sag more acutely, shedding dust like fine ash. The cottage itself felt alive, shuddering under an unseen weight, its structure groaning in protest against the invisible forces assailing it. The entity was pushing, testing the limits, its psychic tendrils wrapping around the very fabric of reality on the island. The journal listed the final pieces, scattered across the island. He needed the focusing crystal, hidden in the old weather station. His grandfather had mentioned it once, a place of isolated observation, a hub of instruments that would capture the island's most minute changes. Now it would serve a different purpose. Dean gathered his few belongings, discarding anything unnecessary. He strapped a sturdy rucksack to his back, a coil of rope, a few preserved rations, and a heavy-duty lantern. His hands shook as he secured the journal inside a waterproof pouch. He knew what he was walking into. Not just a storm, but a psychic assault, a spiritual gauntlet. The event was the ritual itself, a desperate gamble. The revealed discovery had been the journal's final horrifying instruction. The binding was permanent, an eternal vigil. His life, his individuality, would not merely end, it would be transmuted, reshaped into a living, conscious prison for something ancient and malevolent. The immense personal cost wasn't just death. It was a fate far worse. He looked around the small, familiar room, the worn furniture, the maps on the wall. They felt alien now, remnants of a life he was about to surrender. He wouldn't be coming back, not as himself anyway. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep, shuddering breath. Perhaps, in a twisted way, this was a form of atonement, a final act of purpose in a life he'd thought was over. With a grim resolve that felt like a fragile shield against the encroaching madness, Dean unbarred the heavy wooden door. The sound of the wind, or what passed for it, shrieked a wordless protest as he stepped out into the churning, spectral fog. The world outside was a maelstrom of unnatural elements, the air thick with invisible currents, the ground itself seeming to ripple beneath his heavy boots. Every step was a battle against the entity's growing influence, a defiance of its will. He looked towards the faint, distant silhouette of the weather station, barely visible through the swirling gloom. A sudden, sharp crack rent the air, followed by a low, guttural roar that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of Dean's bones. It wasn't a sound from the external world, not thunder, not the crashing surf. It was a sound from within, a seismic tremor of reality itself. The single bare bulb hanging precariously from the lighthouse's ceiling swung wildly, casting erratic shadows that danced like maddened specters across the peeling paint. He clutched the faded journal, its brittle pages now slick with the sweat that beaded on his palms. A consciousness. His consciousness. The words burned in his mind, a chilling prophecy he now understood with a gut-wrenching clarity. Outside, the storm had escalated into a maelstrom. Rain lashed against the lantern room's thick glass, not in drops, but in sheets, obscuring the churning, ink-black sea. He could just make out the distant, skeletal silhouette of the weather station, its anemometer spinning at an impossible velocity even for this gale, a frantic, futile dance against an encroaching, unnatural force. Its instruments, he knew, would be screaming warnings of atmospheric conditions that defied all meteorological understanding. He stumbled toward the central mechanism of the lighthouse, the great lens a cyclopean eye staring out into the tempest. This was the focal point, the conduit. The ritual wasn't just about the words, the symbols, the offerings he'd painstakingly gathered. It was about the intention, the will, his will. He was meant to be the prison. The entity was here, fully manifested, though not in any form his eyes could truly comprehend. It was a presence, an immense, crushing weight on the world, a distortion in the very fabric of existence. The lighthouse groaned around him, the metal framework whining like a tortured beast. They weren't words, not precisely, but a cacophony of ancient sorrows, of forgotten agonies, of a vast, indifferent hunger. His grandfather, his lost love. The entity was probing, seeking purchase, trying to unravel his sanity before he could act. No, Dean rasped, his voice thin against the rising din. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing the grotesque visions away, gripping the journal until his knuckles ached. He focused on the counter-ritual, on the precise sequence of actions. Its flame, small and defiant, was meant to be a beacon, a lure. As he fumbled with the wick, the psychological assault intensified. It showed him his deepest fears, amplified, the crushing weight of his grief, the gnawing loneliness, the absolute insignificance of his life in the face of this ancient, uncaring power. A fleeting spark. We are the deep. We are forever. Dean ignited the lamp. The entity recoiled fractionally, a momentary ebb in the suffocating pressure. He had to act quickly. He began to chant the words from the journal, his voice hoarse, uncertain at first, then growing stronger with each repetition. They were guttural, alien syllables, meant to bind and to contain. As the incantation flowed from him, the very air around the lamp began to shimmer, distorting the light, pulling it inward. The lighthouse began to shake violently, the entire structure groaning as if under the strain of an invisible hand squeezing it. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Outside, the storm seemed to howl in concert with the entity's rage, the wind a shriek, the waves crashing against the island with the force of battering rams. He stumbled, nearly dropping the lamp, but caught himself, his determination hardening into a desperate resolve. This was it. The moment of truth. He had to offer himself. The ritual demanded a consciousness to become the final seal, a living anchor. He understood now that his grandfather hadn't merely kept the entity at bay. He had prepared for this very confrontation, knowing that one day the pact would fail and a new vessel would be needed. Dean's sorrow, his isolation, his very vulnerability made him the perfect candidate. He was already adrift, already half lost. He placed the small, burning lamp at the base of the great lens, its greenish light now pulsating. To the ritual itself, to the binding force. Take me. Invading his very cells, his thoughts, his memories. He gasped, his body convulsing as if struck by lightning. He felt his consciousness stretching, thinning, becoming a vast, empty vessel. It was a deluge of ancient, incomprehensible data, of boundless emptiness, of crushing pressure. He was being filled, becoming the container. The great light of the lighthouse, which had been flickering wildly, suddenly flared, a blinding white column piercing the storm, holding steady. The shaking subsided. The storm, impossibly, began to recede, the wind softening, the rain easing to a gentle patter. The overwhelming presence had vanished. He opened his eyes, feeling utterly, irrevocably changed. The green lamp still burned, casting its eerie glow, and the great light of the lighthouse cut a steady swathe through the retreating fog. The portal was sealed. But the cost. He was the anchor. He was the prison. And he was alone. The coal did not merely blossom. It detonated within him, a silent, internal implosion that shattered the very architecture of his being. His consciousness, already stretched thin, ripped apart at the seams. He was no longer Dean, the cartographer, the man of maps and precise lines. He was a fragment, a whisper, dissolving into a current vast and indifferent. He felt the pull, a suction not of water, but of pure, unadulterated knowing, pulling him down, down, into something boundless and ancient. He saw, not with his eyes, but with the raw, exposed nerves of his dissolving self, images that were not images, swirling currents of primordial thought, pressure so immense it would crush mountains, the slow, relentless grind of eons. He was a single drop subsumed by an ocean, yet within that ocean, he felt the vastness of its memory, its hunger, its patient, terrible watchfulness. The deep song was not a melody. It was the hum of cosmic inertia, the lament of forgotten pacts, the promise of eventual return. And he, Dean, was now part of its chorus. Then a sudden jarring expulsion. He was ejected, flung back into the confines of a body that felt alien, heavy, solid. His eyes snapped open, but they saw only the shifting patterns of his own fractured perception. He lay on something hard, gritty, smelling of salt and damp concrete. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. The air was frigid, biting. He found himself in the main chamber of the weather station. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose panes of glass in the observation dome, a sound that now seemed to mimic the deep song's more agitated passages. His hands, when he looked at them, were shaking, not from fear, but from a profound internal tremor that resonated deep in his bones. He felt full of something vast and terrible, something that had settled in the empty spaces tragedy had left behind. It was not peace, but a heavy, unyielding understanding. He knew the island now, not as a cartographer maps a coastline, but as a living, breathing part of its ancient, submerged heart. He understood the tides, the currents, the depths, not through scientific observation, but through an inherited visceral memory. He stumbled towards the battered console, his reflection staring back at him from the smudged screen. But it was not merely exhaustion that etched itself upon his features. The immediate threat, the encroaching madness, had receded. The entity had been placated, or perhaps satisfied. He was its witness, its silent archivist, burdened with the truth of its eternal patience. The pact had been fulfilled, not by an ancient predecessor, but by him. He was the new guardian, the unwilling sentinel, tethered to the island and its terrible secret. He moved to the observation dome, the metal floor groaning under his weight. Below, the churning slate-gray waves crashed against the rugged cliffs, endless and indifferent. The fog, a familiar shroud, was beginning to lift, revealing the stark, unforgiving landscape of the island. He looked out at the vast expanse of the ocean, stretching to a horizon that now seemed impossibly distant, impossibly deep. He was no longer afraid of it. He was part of it. The lines on his old maps, the precise coordinates he once cherished, seemed ludicrously naive now. They charted surfaces, not the profound, terrible reality that lay beneath. He knew he could not leave. The thought of stepping onto a boat, of sailing away from the island, felt like tearing a limb from his own body. His sanity, though not shattered in the conventional sense, was fundamentally reshaped. He saw the world through a new, terrifying lens, a lens that revealed the thin veneer of human existence over an indifferent, ancient horror. He carried the burden of the deep song's knowledge, a song that would never truly cease to hum in the chambers of his mind. He was no longer Dean, the reclusive cartographer seeking solace. His new life stretched before him, an endless vigil under the watchful, patient eye of the indifferent deep.